Herzlich willkommen.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Der Applaus kommt schon vorher, bevor überhaupt das erste Wort gesagt wird.
There's even applause coming before I utter the first words. Well, initially the idea was there would be 3 of us, 1 virtually, 2 personally on site. Well, but as you can see, I'm the only one up here on the stage. Unfortunately, however, Marcus wasn't able to make it on time, Marcus Willand. That's why we're only 2, namely myself here, and in a minute, Becker from Apex.AI will send us a video message. So welcome to all of you, first of all. Now, what is this about? The question we want to discuss is whether autonomous driving can be the silver bullet for autonomous mobility. Now, that's a teaser for this year's study. You will all know that we publish a mobility study every year, which we're going to publish towards the end of this year. And today, we are going to provide you a glimpse at the questions we're going to deal with. Well, if you look at the complexity of cars today and the complexity of the environments they operate in, then it's an almost ironic twist of history that we, with all of our mistakes and our uncertainties, steer and control these vehicles on our own. That's why I brought along this quote, which is really to the point, namely, that this can only be the future, namely that we equip cars in such a manner that they can drive at least as good as or even better than a human. And I'd like to show you that for us, automotive means the first step towards data-driven mobility. I think that's nothing new to you, but why does it take a new business logic for this purpose? And now, I promise this is going to be the only boring slide I'm going to share with you. If you look at today's transformation in the automotive industry, then very often we talk about that A to B area. So you've got vehicles, you've got the hardware under control. It might be the best vehicles in the world. They're excellent at driving, they are highly comfortable, and you want to enhance them using software, which means you create add-on service within an ecosystem. All of this is well known. But today, we want to talk about something else. We talk about the business logic, which takes us to data-enabled learning. And that is where the difference will then arise between companies who are able to set up their business in a software-enabled manner on the one hand, and others who manage to connect large volumes of data, which thus further improves the product proper, thus attracting more users, providing more data. And this leads to a continuous loop, which results in continuous improvement, which means the added value increases the more people participate. And this only works if the vehicles permanently feed back their data into this overall system. And that's something you need either to control yourself, or you've got to buy it externally. Now, what does Becker say about this? Now, he spends most of his time in the US, and at Apex.AI, he is developing an automotive OS, which is being developed with horizontal integration. So let's have a look at this. Now, specifically regarding autonomous driving, data are the basis of performance. So there's a lot of situations where data is generated, which we gather in order to respond to such situations in a high performance manner, and that ensures the robustness, reliability, and also efficiency in development, which is getting more and more important also for the OEMs and the suppliers. Now, what we currently see in the market, and I think that's just the solution, is companies taking the first solutions onto the roads, which step by step also expands the use cases. So you start at daytime at good weather, then step by step you also start operating at nighttime or in poor weather conditions. And of course, if you have learned with the help of one data set, then you cannot take it for granted that it also works well in other conditions or in other situations. And that's the point. The first thing is to get the stability of the vehicles right with the help of software, but the second thing is to enhance the use cases and the performance for all users. Some OEMs are already working on this. We talked about business logic, we talk about software enabled, and we talked about enabled data learning. And I brought along that slide to show you who's doing what. And you can see we've got the traditional players on the one hand and the digital ones on the other hand. And when we talk about the new business logic, then it's clear to state that the know-how for enabled learning is more to the right, to put it in a diplomatic manner. And we have to learn building these products ourselves. We are good at digitalizing processing. We are good at managing hardware. So the traditional automotive industry has to learn when it comes to data and data learning. So that's that additional step to be taken to get into the C range which we saw on the previous slide. Now, what concepts are we currently talking about? And when we talk about sustainability, then these are not ecological aspects only, but also economic and social sustainability matters. So people, for example, who do not have access to a vehicle because they don't have a driver's license, or because they are too young, or because they do have some disability. And we've got to provide them with access to mobility as well, and that's what autonomous driving will do. And we'll come back to Jan in a minute again, who will then also talk about the first use cases we expect to see, because we want to provide you a bit of a sneak preview of our study. And we do see a research gap exactly at this point, namely, which products will scale up first? So where will we see autonomous mobility on the roads at first? So we have a mixture of people and goods, that is logistics on the one hand, and at the end of the day, of course, if you have larger vehicles, which means if you're going to the right, then you will also have a higher ecological efficiency. And now, let's turn to Jan in Palo Alto once again. Yes, the obvious challenges are the traffic density, and with this kind of systems you can generate a more homogeneous traffic flow, and via vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to environment communication you can better use the existing transport infrastructure, that is the roads, for example. So you can have vehicles traveling closer to each other or traveling at a more constant speed between traffic lights, and in a mixed mode of traffic or with humans controlling vehicles, that is not possible. Another key aspect on top of that is that with autonomous mobility you can also make mobility better accessible. So people who do not have access to buses at present, for example, you can provide a network of buses or smaller buses for them to ensure better accessibility for everybody. Now, the reason well, with an autonomous vehicle, you just define a target or a destination and a charging station at the definition. And if you then have the proper network and proper control, then you're not dependent on the driver's requirements and expectations anymore. And that is also very relevant for our clients, namely, where do we have to run further studies? Where do we have to invest, and where should we maybe wait and invest somewhat later. There's already a large number of studies out there covering the various dimensions of mobility, and we want to exactly fill the gap. Because yes, we say we've got the requirements of customers, B2C. We also have got B2B requirements with certain underlying logics. And through some research, we also understand what the impact on cities and on cities and on the rural region is. But we want to see in the combination of all of this, what are the first concepts that will be successful. Now, in our research, we will cover the 3 global regions, namely Europe, China, and the US, and we will have an online survey in these regions with about 4,500 people, and we will also have expert interviews in these 3 markets. And then across the various dimensions shown here, we will ask them various questions in order to exactly close that gap which I just described. Well, the initial drivers for autonomous driving, of course, have been and still are in the US. And the capital is no longer distributed widely anymore, but it is rather gathered by and in the big OEMs companies, because implementing autonomous driving is a much bigger effort and investment than expected initially. And in Europe, we see Mercedes having launched the first Level 3 series production vehicle. And the Europeans, of course, they are somewhat ahead in launching these things in a reliable and robust manner in the markets. China, I think, will further detach itself. China wants to control the software side, and I expect that the American and the Chinese market will ring-fence each other versus the other one more intensely. And I think that the European and the American market will grow closer together, and that there will be a separate Chinese market, at least for the base software. So this is how ecological ecosystems evolve. It's no longer going to be 10 or 12, but rather 1 or 2 or 3. Because the key players, they do not want to develop for 10 or 12 ecosystems, but they want to pick out the 2 or 3 biggest ones with the biggest potential for market penetration. And against that background, we see a certain trend of deglobalization, not only in the physical and analog supply chains, but also in the digital ecosystem. And for this reason, we will have to look at all of the 3 regions, and then we will be able to derive recommended actions for the different players. That's the typical OEM, but it's also mobility service providers, private and public ones, cities and municipalities, and we want to be able to give all of them guidance as how to this market can and will evolve further.
Kurz quasi eine kleine Retro-Werbung machen.
And this is a bit of advertising. We've already published 2 studies, and we looked at the mobility transition and the mobility operating system. So how will mobility be consumed in the future in a digital manner? Now we want to put one more thing on top of that. Can autonomous mobility for the transportation of goods and for the transportation of persons, now can this have an impact onto further enhancement of sustainability? I'm very much looking forward to the months of September and October, because that's when we will have completed the various surveys, and we will then also have held the expert interviews, and then we will be able to publish this as a large market research study. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I think it's going to be exciting to see once the first scaled autonomous cases will be available. Of course, we've done some advanced research, and I think it's to be expected that logistics use cases will be the first ones. And if you look at the infrastructure in the US, for example, with thousands of miles being driven by truckers, well, then it is safe to assume that this is where you will see the first autonomous vehicles, who will then also be able to drive in platoons to save even more CO2. So at this point, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to a bit of a discussion now.